We're going to look at the question, how can I get the best from my coffee beans as a roaster, moving from a sample roast to a profile, finding that profile, to moving to a production roaster. Hey there friends, this is Adam with Rock at SCA.training and How to Coffee Pro. I wanted to introduce real quick to you the resources that are available and the next series of leadership topics. So first off, if you haven't been to rock.coffee, go ahead and go over there, check out. We have a lab with lots of tools. It'll also point you to SCA.training and How to Coffee Pro if you're thinking about courses or supplies for those courses. So you can find grinders, equipment, Jean Lenoir, Linné products, and even this consulting package. If you're a green coffee seller or roaster, I'd love to help you out on that with feedback and analysis. So if you'd like to go over to How to Coffee Pro and get started on an SCA certified course, these are enrolling online, continuous enrolling on demand with your schedule, and then coaching and cohort calls. You can get certified in all 6 of these modules online. I would love to help you from that, from 0 to pro. And we do have intermediate and professional options available at SCA.training. We specifically have some professional courses that are coming up. Just jump on over to the lab, however you navigate there, and you'll see those listed at the end of 2022 here as we're speaking. We also have Q graders coming up in Ethiopia, Addis, lots of training kits, so great stuff at SCA.training. But specifically today, we are going to be jumping into the blog. So you can go ahead and head on over to the blog here or scroll on down, and we will be talking about our leadership series. So I can't wait to share with you more and help you keep growing and making life better using coffee. All right, let's dive in. How can I get the best from my coffee beans as a roaster, moving from a sample roast to a profile, finding that profile, to moving to a production roaster? My name is Adam Carpenter, and I'm the lead AST, the founder at Rock Coffee Company. Thank you for my YouTube subscribers, those of you who watch, comment, like, and share with your friends. It really helps me, and it helps our global coffee community. Maybe you're one of my students at howtocoffeepro.com. I offer online and offline certification with the Specialty Coffee Association. So wherever and however we've connected or you found this video, thank you for watching, and I can't wait to dialogue further with you. This is a presentation of how to get the best from your beans that I shared at Coffee Fest in Seattle, Washington, Friday the 30th of September, 2022. So I'm going to read through the script and the dialogue. You can download a PDF of the presentation. So I have the slides. You can check out the blog, which has extra links and directs you to more knowledge that you can apply from this topic. So I hope that you'll look down in the show notes, you'll click to the blog, you'll open the links, you'll join the newsletter, and then you can really get the most out of this presentation. Or you can just listen and ask some questions later if you want to go further. All right, so let's dive in. Thank you for tuning in here, and thank you for everyone who did attend the session. I'm sharing these as a playback and a replay for those who were at Coffee Fest. So we want to answer the question, how to get the best from your beans. I'm excited to unpack this topic together with you today, and I intentionally use this unpack. I want to work on this topic together because we are all growing and learning how to do coffee roasting better. We've got coffee training programs, we've got coffee quality control methods, and it's a continual practice. It's an exercise. I shared 3 sessions at Coffee Fest. One of them was developing and maintaining a coffee training program. You may have already watched that video, or you may find it after this one. How to get the best from your beans, sample, profile, production, roasting, and then also cupping controversial coffees. So if you're interested in any of those, or you'd like to connect, my social Instagram, LinkedIn, all of that will be shared here. You can also find me and my resources at www.sca.training or rock.coffee. So sca.training or rock.coffee. Great, let's dive in. I've got my coffee going here. Hope you have your coffee going as well. So first off, I just want to share, there's always a desire. You'll see people on YouTube, speakers in an audience, and they have a strong desire to be liked, to be approved. So I'm not sharing this to try to impress you. This really is a work in progress. And I just want you to know that I'm laying that desire aside. I really want this to help you. So these are some attempts to share and to put into words the regular work that I would do when I was roasting coffee in Central China. So ROCC, R-O-C-C, stands for Roasters of Central China. That's where we started, 2012. And we had the challenge of bringing in coffees that have traveled great distances. A lot of times they were not handled or transferred from ship to truck or from truck to warehouse or from shipping to final destination. And so we would get coffees that were less than ideal. We would also get coffees that perhaps were older, and we would also have to buy coffees that could fit our market demographic. In Central China, they weren't willing to pay very much for espressos and blends, so we really had to control what we could. And by doing that, purchasing lower quality coffees or older coffees, we kind of developed this mindset and this mantra to make every bean shine. And this really resonated with a newer version of that. My good friend Saifa in Ethiopia, he often says every coffee has a home. The high grade specialty coffee, the lower grade blender coffees, all of these coffees have a home. And our goal was to make every bean shine. So that's really what we're looking at here, how to optimize that sample, profiling, and production roasting. And we're going to look at a concrete example of how I scaled a very small sample roast whiskey barrel aged coffee. It was a 5-minute, 55-second roast. We had to transfer that from my roast, 100-gram sample roast here, up to a 10-pound, 10-kilogram, however large we were going to do it, on a San Franciscan gas roaster. And so that'll be our concrete example that we'll look at. I realize it's not a cookie cutter approach, but the model and method will work when you look at your specific pair of roasters or roasting application or the beans that you're working with. And so we're always trying to build these logical frameworks, not rules. We're building logical frameworks that as roasters we can then improvise on and manipulate as things come and change with our coffees and our roasting setup. Little about myself. My name's Adam, and I love helping people grow. I love helping businesses grow. Our vision at ROCC was always to use training and these tools in a global coffee community to make life better. We built community. We called it our playground, where we'd exercise and work out those concepts in that training to become better at business and serving people through coffee. I grew up on a small farm in Michigan drinking coffee with my father and my grandfather. It was often instant Folgers coffee crystals. But I would see my grandpa and my dad working hard on the farm, making the best of what they could with the soil, with the land that they had. And I just wanted to be like them, right? I wanted to share coffee. Even when I didn't love the taste of it, I still just loved the relationship that it created. Later, I got the chance to travel to Costa Rica and work on a Costa Rican coffee farm with coffee farmers, picking cherries by day, playing football, going to the discoteca at night. It was only a few days, but they made such an impact on me. And as a farm boy, I really realized, these are my people. And coffee is this global beverage that starts with a farmer. And I started to really see something developing there. I didn't see where it was going, though. Not until my wife and I moved to China as English teachers, and we were teaching, and I didn't want to teach English forever, but I knew we wanted to stay in China for a longer period of time. So I ended up opening ROC as a artisan roastery, specialty roastery in Central China. And it was Central China's first. There were only a couple others, Beijing, Shanghai, maybe down in Hong Kong, and it was really hard to get started in 2012. But we did. We did wholesale, retail, opened up a couple coffee bars, and then I joined the Specialty Coffee Association of Europe. I became a trainer in all of the modules for the Specialty Coffee Association and would travel to various clients, roasteries, and cafes offering training in English and Mandarin Chinese. So it's my joy today to be able to connect with you wherever you're connecting and share this content. It's a little bit outside of that SCA curriculum, but just know that, whatever I do and share, it is founded in professional certification in all of the different modules that the SCA offers. I'd be honored to work with your team or business if you want to connect and grow. So let's get into the topic. Thanks for your patience as we introduce everything. So how to get the best from your beans. Today in this seminar, we worked with a Colombia Excelso EP. So EP stands for European Preparation, which meant that it just had this extra level of sorting to ensure that screen size was above 15. This was an Excelso EP 10%. You can look at, more depth about some of the different standards that we use to name coffee. But let's assume that you've already looked at a few different Colombian samples. You're in a roastery, you get samples each year, or you're trying to replace this year, 2022, make purchasing decisions to carry on some of the single origins or blends that you've had in years prior. So you've already selected this Colombian Excelso EP from the other Colombians. That first stage of selection would have been like a standard SCA green sample cupping, where you're cupping for the attributes of sweetness and acidity in body. You're checking for defects. You're seeing, does this Colombia fit within my prior portfolio if I'm blending or using it as a single origin? So now that we know this is the coffee that I want to find out what the uses of it might be. It may have multiple uses. And in China at ROC, we would often do this with our coffee. We would try to find a coffee that was, what we would always do is we had this espresso blend where we blended Colombia, Guatemala, Ethiopia, and then 10% Robusta from India. But we would try to do Colombian and Guatemalan and Ethiopian that not only fit our espresso blend profile, that was goal number one, we also wanted to have the option of running these as single origin coffees. And so what happened was we would run the Colombian as a single origin medium roast, the Guatemalan as a single origin dark roast, and the Ethiopian as a single origin light roast. So these coffees had two purposes: to fill our espresso need and then also to be able to stand alone as a great single origin. This Colombian that we brought, we roasted to various levels to try to figure that same goal out. So what I did was I just took a standard roast profile on my roast sample roaster and set a goal of about 5 degrees Celsius or centigrade different. So about 9 degrees difference Fahrenheit on the drop temperature. It was a pretty broad survey, but I wanted to see what this coffee would do at a very light development and then a much darker development. So we put these tables out on put these coffees out on the table, and they ranged from a very light roast, which was kind of the middle of first crack. First crack hadn't even finished, and then all the way up to a drop temp of 224 Celsius. That was kind of in the middle of second crack. So from the middle of first crack all the way up to the middle of second crack, we were able to see all of the transformations that this Colombia Excelso EP would go through. It provided us a full range of possibilities to see what kind of acids are in this coffee. How will it develop sweetness? How does the body transform? Does it fall flat? Does it fall apart? Does it withstand the heat? This is the kind of question that I would usually ask myself, or I always ask myself when I'm selecting a bean: how and where can I use this coffee? Because as you do this more often, you'll find not all coffees fit into each of the levels. Some will shine in one or more places, and you'll be surprised. Sometimes they do better darker, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do better lighter, sometimes they don't. You can't roast all coffees the same way. I think if you're watching this, you may know that by now. So after taking these coffees, we put them on the table, and our attendees at the meeting, we got to cup the coffees. So we used a standard cupping procedure, just like we had a standard roasting procedure. We fixed the variables that don't change. The only thing that's changed in this is that final drop temperature. And then secondary variables like subtle rate of rise required to reach that temperature, or subtle adjustments to just the time. Time naturally will change if you're roasting longer and darker or shorter and lighter. But those are secondary variables. Our first control variable was that drop in temperature. So we went from 200 degrees Celsius to 206, 209, 215, 220, and 224. From a very fast, light, middle of first crack roast to a longer, middle of second crack roast. And what we could see in the very early stages, that very light roast was a very bright, high acidity. It was like lemon juice, super juicy, but it was very unbalanced, just like having a lemon. You know, these sharp, strong notes, but just not anything else that could keep up with that intensity. As we roasted darker, it became, more sweetness, more body filled in. The lemon started to mellow out as caramel and sugar cane and nuts, cinnamon and spices and chocolate came in. And at the end, roasty wood cacao, dry and bitter finish. It was just kind of the progression that we went through. So if you want to set up a program like this, just go ahead and choose a coffee. You can set 4, 5, 6 goals. You can do 7 or 8 goals, however many you want. And try to get like a standard step progression for that coffee. Now, in our coffee, there was a really big difference that we found from the first 2 samples, which were super bright, into that third medium light, where it just went straight from like bright, juicy acidity to that caramelized, nutty aspect. So if I were to redo this again, I would try to distinguish the first 2, or maybe take that second one just a little darker, because the time on the first 2 was almost the same, even though the temperature was quite different. So there was not much of a gap in between those. And maybe, this method is good as a framework, but don't try to replicate my roast profiles or my charge and drop temps. Every roaster and every situation will be different. Even if you have a roast, you have it in a different location, and it probably has different bean probes, or it's a different model than mine. So we never want to try to copy someone else's rate of rise, ROR curves. We never want to copy someone else's, program and profile specifically. We can try it, we can find out how our coffee does, but we have to judge it by the cupping table. So, feedback on this coffee, we found that there were some really nice, light, sweet coffees. There were some really bold, darker coffees. This Colombia really does have a number of places that it would shine. So, from a preferential, from a hedonic standpoint, we asked the crowd, and several people preferred the darker roast. Several people preferred the medium roast. Several people preferred that light level. And so, depending on your coffee market, your clientele, and your specific uses, you will have coffee like this that you might say, we can put this into a couple of our different products and make our people happy. It's also really good. I advise you to consider doing this experiment every 3 to 6 to 9 months, or I would say every 3 months, because at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, when that coffee has been in your inventory, as you are letting that coffee age, as the seasons have changed, that coffee will die. it will dry out and it will change with its age. So as the coffee ages, it generally becomes more dry. Even when you store it in optimal conditions, 60% relative humidity, packaged in Grain Pro plastic bags, out of direct sunlight, away from the wall so that the wall isn't emitting heat or cold. When we keep that coffee stable, even still, every 3, 6, 9 months, you are going to find that the coffee is losing moisture. That means it's more sensitive to the heat in the roaster. It develops quicker or burns more easily. And so doing this will really help you not just to find where the coffee should be tasted. Like if you chose the number 2 roast and the number 5 roast. If you chose number 2 and number 5, if you tried to roast that same profile in 3 months or in 6 months, you would find that number 2 would become much darker. It might feel like number 3. Or number 5 might become quite burnt and something might become, you don't like the flavor of it anymore like you did originally. So running this series of profile development later on is really good to help tweak those profiles. Now, as we move from that sampling of these different levels to actually profiling and scaling, this is the concept that we have to use, for example, when we're moving from 100 grams up to 10 kilograms. So I have roasted on a number of roasters, and I found this to work. It's efficient and it's fast on a small sample roaster. Generally, we need just more patience, and the development on a large roaster, because we have a large bean mass, is just going to be slower, right? It's the difference between driving a fast motorcycle and then driving a big semi-truck, right? Both of them can get up to full speed. Both of them can get you to your destination. But if you're racing around on a little sport motorcycle, you're going to be able to get there, make the turns faster than you do on a big semi-truck. So there's your analogy for scaling. We also have to ask ourselves, what about transferring from like a small convective air roaster to a large gas drum roaster? Or you may have a small sample gas or electric drum roaster, and you may be scaling up to a large air conduction or fluid bed roaster. No matter what we're scaling between, we need to understand that the same physics and math, the same thermodynamics, the heat is going to work. It just needs to be scaled so that those chemical changes can happen in the bean that preserve and replicate those sensory properties of the roast. I'll repeat that again. What we're judging this by is the cupping table and the sensory properties of the roast. So the fragrance and the aroma and the sweetness and acidity and the body, everything that we get on the cupping table, that's what matters. It doesn't matter if we get that same tasting cupping result in 6 minutes or in 11 minutes. It doesn't matter. The goal is to get that coffee tasting the same, right? So the way that we do that is just scaling, lengthening, shortening those various aspects through math and physics and thermodynamics. These are fixed scientific measures. So we're actually going to keep this simple for this example, but we'll do a little bit of math. We're going to look at a couple profiles here. They are in the blog and the PDF if you have gone to the blog or downloaded the PDF. So first off, we have a 100 gram sample from our air convection on the roast, and we'd like to move to a 10 to 20 kilogram roast on a traditional drum. I would do this on a Quest M3 300 gram electric drum roaster to a Diedrich IR12, which is a 12 kilogram, 25 pound roaster, which used propane natural gas. So small electric drum to a big propane drum. I had just the electrical heating elements, and then we moved to infrared porcelain burners on the Diedrich. So this would work, and we just had to follow the beans, and we had to follow the cupping table results working backward. So here's how we reverse engineer that. Let's look at the super light roast, the 200 degree drop temperature. So from the screenshot, you can see some of the different lines that are represented there. This is the roast profile that you get on the feed out, or the readout, the feedback from the sample roaster. So there's a blue line for air environmental temperature. That's the ET. That's the amount of power above the red line, which is the bean probe temperature, the BT. So the blue line is the air environment, which is pulling up that bean temperature. So that distance in between, that's how much force you have to keep that pulling. The light green was a rate of rise, so that's the, sharply rising and then ever decreasing kind of rate of rise on the roast. And then there's fan speed, drum chamber speed, and power. That black line is the power. So on mine, I tried to hold a consistent power until near first crack, and then I would modulate that power a little bit so that I could reach a good target on the drop. And then the charge temperature was 165 Celsius. That was the environmental temperature for all 6. So, I'm just reading my blog here. I had an insertion from the former training. I need to remove that. Great. Glad that we found that while I'm going through the blog and sharing this. Okay. Here we go. Super light. So specifically, let's answer the questions. How should we plan for this roast, the super light roast? It was 6 minutes and 25 seconds. We need to scale up to a full production roast. So let's say this is a very light roast, and on my production roaster, I should be able to reach this target of 200 degrees with this kind of, how much development time was there? Anyways, I'm going to be able to finish this roast at 9 minutes. And so I need to scale from 625 up to 9. The first thing that you want to do is you want to configure everything into seconds. And so just consider, where are my seconds? And that's just the marker that we can use. It's much better than minutes and seconds. So, dry end, we can look at that. That's 165 seconds. First crack happened at 340 seconds. End of the roast was at 385 seconds. How do we get that? End of the roast was 6 minutes, 25 seconds. So 6 times 60 is 360. Plus 25 equals 385 seconds. So 385 seconds, let's consider that like a rubber band, right? So right there, that's 385 seconds. And so if we want to get that same roast in 9 minutes, then we can develop the same coffee. We just have to stretch this out to 9 minutes. So the rubber band example is a really helpful visual. We can, in a small roaster, just like that fast sport bike motorcycle, we can get to our destination and have a great tasting coffee in this amount of time. 385 seconds. Well, let's scale everything up to 9 minutes, right? 9 times 60 is 540. So if it takes us 540 seconds to get to that same result as it did 385, then we just need to figure out a few of our markers that we're going to use. We want to know, when should first crack happen? Or when should dry end happen? How long should we spend in first crack? One simple way to do that is just division. So if we want to say, for example, here we have, using division from the end of dry end, which was 150 degrees, to the end of the roast, which was 200 degrees. We want to increase 50 degrees centigrade in 220 seconds. So end of the roast was 385 seconds minus 165 seconds. That's where dry end was reached. So we have 3 minutes and 40 seconds, or it's 220 seconds. We divide 220 seconds, that's that second gap from dry end to the end. We divide that by the total roast time, which was 385. So 220 divided by 385 is 57%. 57% of the roast was spent in that later development stage, from dry end to the end. So on a 9-minute roast, our 9-minute roast will be 57% of 9 minutes. So 9 minutes, 45 seconds, 540 seconds. So 540 seconds, we want 57% of this. So half of, just over half of that, 57%, we're going to multiply 0.57 times that 540 seconds, and we're going to find out this last stage that we're looking at should be 308 seconds. That's 5 minutes, 8 seconds. So what we used to do on the first roast, this little roast, what we used to do in 220 seconds should now take us 308 seconds. Okay, so that's the basic idea of this scaling. And we could do that for the development time after first crack to the end. We can do that for turning point. If on our small roaster turning point is at 30 seconds, well, what's 30? What percentage of our total roast was the turning point time? So we could do that 385 seconds, that's our short roast, divided by 30 seconds divided by 385, and that'll give us our little, it's less than 10%, will be the turning point time. Well, on a 9-minute roast, 540 seconds, that 30-second turning point might actually be more like 50 seconds. So each of these stages can just be stretched that same amount. We can stretch the turning point, stretch the development, stretch the time from dry end to end of the roast, stretch the total roast time. We can use that 57% as a general metric. And I often do find that a lot of sample roasters up to production, starting with a 1.5 scale is a great place to start. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on example number 2, but if you look at roast number 2, the sample level 206 degree drop. So we do the same thing to understand our development time. So the development time on sample number 2 was 1 minute and 14 seconds. And that 1 minute and 14 seconds was 19% of the roast. 19% of a roast, that was only 394 seconds. Okay? So if you have 19% of a roast, that's 6 minutes and 34 seconds, 394 seconds. Well, that's our short roast. That's our sample roast. So we want to go from 6 minutes, 34 seconds all the way up to, in this example, 10 minutes. So then we just have 19% of 10 minutes. 10 minutes is 600 seconds. So 19% of 600 seconds is 114 seconds, or a minute 54. So what was a minute 14 in the sample roast for development becomes a minute 54 in our production roast. Again, this is a model and a method, but the logic is quite straightforward when you think about that scaling. I used this, and the reason I wanted to expound this was a challenging project with a whiskey barrel-aged coffee that we had a couple years ago at a roastery that I was working at. The full write-up of that project is available on roastcoffee.com on the roast blog, barrel-aged coffee roasting. We took a washed Guatemalan coffee and I soaked it, hung it suspended in a mesh bag in an old used whiskey barrel. So the bottom was, it was damp, but there was no real whiskey in the barrel. It was just the wood was full of the aromas of this whiskey. It was an Oregon rye whiskey, a single malt whiskey. And what we wanted to do was figure out first, how long should we soak this coffee in the aromas, and then how should we roast that coffee. So this is the same thing as like having your green selection and then finding a profile that you like on this coffee. And then once we found that profile, we had to scale it up to production roast so that we could sell it. I sampled multiple iterations of this coffee at different moisture levels. We essentially rehydrated the coffee. So I got it up to a 13% moisture, which was as high as I wanted to go without damaging or compromising the safety of the coffee. And a lot of different ways we would roast it, and it would taste odd, or it would just taste like Guatemalan coffee. And so I found a method of roasting which had a very long, deliberate soak in the roast. And so we weren't just suspending the coffee in the aromatics. We actually soaked the coffee, which is a term where you just let the coffee ride in any section. You let it ride through the heat of the roaster, the ambient heat in the roaster. So you can see on this chart here, the whiskey barrel, that there was this long, deliberate soak for the turning point. And so the thought process, and I'm not going to say this is a rule, but the thought process was to try to preserve some of the aromatics in the coffee. So getting the coffee up to temperature gently without just hitting it with a normal hard, sharp turning point like we do on a lot of our roasting. But then I aggressively applied heat, because after the inside of that bean had gotten warm, then we could kind of penetrate all of the coffee and try to get it up to its target as fast as possible, so we weren't slowly just emitting all of the whiskey barrel vapors, if you will. This is the very dramatic roasting method that proved to be the one we all liked the most. It just had this beautiful banana, clove, spiced, sweet, syrupy quality to it, which we thought highlighted not just the Guatemalan, but also the whiskey barrel effect. So how do you take that from a little roaster, a convective roaster that can do this incredible spike of heat, it's extremely efficient with the convective air, onto a San Franciscan drum roaster? What we realized, first of all, was in order to have a very strong and aggressive heat transfer like this, we need to have a smaller batch. And so we ran the roaster at, 40% capacity roundabout, which was only 10 pounds. Or no, we did 50% capacity in. So we did 12 pounds in. And then the goal on this was to mimic the application of heat, and then to measure the moisture loss, the weight loss at the end of the roasting cycle. And so what we measured on the sample roast was a 14% weight loss. And what we were able to achieve, it had a slightly different end temperature, slightly different charge temperature, but a very similar application of heat with a long drawn-out soak. We were able to replicate a 14% moisture loss. And so 12 pounds went down to 10.32, 10.32. And it proved on the cupping table to be that same character that we loved from the sample roast. So we did the same, that same concept where we had a 5-minute, 55-second roast on the sample roaster, very, very fast. And we said, okay, if turning point occurs, turning point was very delayed. It was about at a minute 15 seconds. If turning point is happening at a minute 15, on a 10-minute roast, our turning point might be clear out to 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And if we're reaching a target temperature of 150 degrees centigrade right near 3 minutes 5, 3 minutes 10, That's like 60% of the roast is early on to get to that stage. And if we're reaching first crack at 5 minutes, 5 seconds, then on our production roaster, that means we need to be reaching first crack at 8 minutes, 45 seconds. And so everything was just kind of that same scaling, and we were able to set targets. So we could say, try to hit the turning point here, try to hit the dry end here, try to hit the first crack here, try to hit the drop here, and then we're going to check the moisture, and we're going to check the cupping results. And so on each of those, just by giving ourselves multiple targets along that 10-minute, 11-minute path, we had to figure out how long is this going to take? We were able to reach our desired cupping. All right, so I've shared a lot of things in this presentation. I'm really grateful for your time. I know it's hard to get secondhand or a playback, but there may be some questions that you have. I want to reiterate the fact that these are not rules, but this is a logic and a framework that I would love to hear how you've applied it. You may find that for a certain pairing of roasters, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 is a good scaling method. For another pair of roasters, you might find, 1.6 or 7 or 8 is actually a better scaling for your roasters. And you'll be in a different location. Your voltage might be 120 or 240, 220. I've worked on both voltages, and I've seen this scaling work. You might be working with natural gas or propane tank gas. I've worked with both. I've seen it work. You may be on a big drum or a small convective air. Let me know what questions and what kind of feedback you have. Love to hear how your roasting goes. If you have any desire to check out the presentation, like I said, it's at www.sca.training at the blog. Tools and equipment can be found in the lab there, especially training materials for classes or advanced classes, Q-grader courses, SCA courses, intermediate and professional level. If you want to check out tools and equipment at the Rock Coffee Lab, L'Année du Café, grinders, cupping supplies, things that you would need for a cafe or roastery. And then if you want to get in touch or stay connected, I have an email newsletter. You can find the link down below and on all my social connections. I'm on Instagram at HowToCoffeePro, and can't wait to connect with you and keep making life better, friends, using our global coffee community. This is our playground for learning and growth together. Thank you for your time. See you in the next video.